Hey guys, thanks for watching again. Today in class we learned about finding the mean of a random variable, which is also known as the expected value. Tonight you're going to be working on calculating the standard deviation of a random variable. So it's kind of the same definition that we saw at the beginning of the year. The standard deviation, again, is just a measure of how much these outcomes are going to vary from that expected value or from that mean. So we end up calculating it a lot like we did at the beginning of the year, just modifying it slightly because we're now working with probability distributions. So when you calculate the standard deviation of a discrete random variable, you can use the calculator, and we will use the calculator. You will use that to make sure you don't make any mistakes on the AP exam. But you are required to show some work. You cannot just write down the final answer and move on. They're not going to assume that you knew how to do that in the calculator. You have to show the actual steps. So we're going to start today kind of finding the standard deviation by hand, or showing you at least how to set it up, and then we will end with finding it in the calculator. So that's what you should be able to do by the end of this video. So you should remember and recognize this problem from kind of a couple days ago. We are looking at the probability that someone's going to speak just one language, 2, 3, 4, or 5 languages. So again, most people are only speaking one language, few people speaking 2, and then very few speaking 3, 4, or 5. So if I'm asking you to compute the standard deviation, before we do that, you would have to know what the expected value is. So this problem was here to make your life a little bit easier, and it gave you the expected value already. Let's just double check, make sure that this is correct, and practice our skills from today. Go ahead and pause the video now for a second and see if you can practice calculating the expected value using this probability distribution, and you should get 1.457. Okay, so if we take each outcome, multiply it by its likelihood or by its probability, get the sum of that, we do get this 1.457. So if we were to interpret that, it pretty much means that a randomly selected student speaks an average of 1.457. So if we were to select many random students and average that, we would get 1.457 languages. So it still shows us that most people aren't speaking many more than one, just over a little bit to compensate for all those people who do speak 2, 3, or 4, or 5 languages. Okay, so now that we have our expected value, we want to know on average how far off is each outcome. And what I mean by that is how far is the average distance away from 1.457. So it's either they're speaking one language, we're going to look at the difference there. 2 languages, 3, 4, or 5. So to find the distance or how far off they are, we use subtraction, just like we did at the beginning of the year. So I'm going to find the difference between just speaking one language and then speaking the mean. But when I do that, I'm going to have a negative number. So as you know from before, if we were to find all of these differences and add them up, we would get a sum of 0. Because the negatives would cancel out the positives. So I can't just do this. I need to figure out a way to make it non-negative, so we square it, just like before. So the only problem is this distance or this difference happens a lot more than all the other differences because most people are only speaking one language. So we have to take that into account. How we do that is we multiply this value by the likelihood that that's going to happen. That likelihood is pretty high. It was 63% of the time they're only speaking one language. So here's the difference. We've never done this before where we take this outcome and multiply it by its probability. So we're going to get the sum of each of these differences. So here was kind of that first one. Now we take speaking 2 languages, finding the difference there, multiplying it by that probability, plus speaking 3 languages, and so on and so forth. So you'll notice I have this plus ... which means I don't feel like writing anymore. You don't need to write anymore. That's totally fine. You can move on. So notice we've squared all of these, and we did not take the square root yet. So right now, technically, this is the variance. We have not calculated the standard deviation. Hopefully you remember to move from the variance to the standard deviation. We kind of undo these powers of 2 by taking the square root. So as soon as you take the square root of that, you have your final answer. So on averages, the number of languages that are spoken by a randomly selected student are going to deviate from the mean of 1.457 by 0.671. Oh, I almost forgot about the halfway joke. Don't know if you'll guess it. Alright, I tried. Hilarious. Okay, so in any case, on your homework, you can kind of use this to fill in your final answer. And I even went ahead and interpreted it for you. Okay. Realistically, you're going to want to use the calculator. So if you pick up your calculator and go to stat lists, we're going to use one variable statistics just like we did at the beginning of the year to find the actually expected value or the standard deviation. So we don't even really need to show all of our, or we don't need to find the expected value by hand. I think you will be asked to show all of your work, but just nice to know that you have that option. So you're going to list the outcomes in L1 and the probability of each outcome in L2, just like this. Stat calc 1 for one variable statistics. Make sure those of you with the older calculators are typing in L1, L2, and when you press enter, everything will be there for you. So at this point, you should be comfortable calculating and interpreting the standard deviation of a random variable, both by hand and in the calculator. So take a minute to practice that again if you need to, and then you're going to use this video to help you with the back of your homework assignment, which you need to complete on your own.